Good afternoon and welcome to the stream. Today we're going to be reading a bit of Harry Potter, and if there's time afterwards, we're going to be doing a bit of Hunger Games. This is Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, of course by J.K. Rowling. A very popular series of books. If you haven't read them already, I encourage you to do so. There's 7 of them, and we'll be going through them. And be if you had them, and we could read through them together, because the words I read and what's actually in the book do tend to differ sometimes. There's a sentence maybe that's a bit long and you're halfway through and then you've realised you've made a mistake and you can't stop now, so you just change it to something that fits in with it. So I do encourage you, buy the book, read it, and read along. You'll have noticed our guest star today as well, Nimbus. We've got him at a bit of a different angle. He'll be asleep probably for most of the stream. Hopefully he'll stay still. This is chapter 23, Horcruxes. Harry could feel Felix Felicius wearing off as he crept back into the castle. The front door had remained unlocked for him, but on the 3rd floor he met Peeves, and only narrowly avoided by detection by diving through one of his shortcuts. By the time he got up to the portrait of the fat lady and pulled off his invisibility cloak, he was not surprised to find her in a most unhelpful mood. "What sort of time do you call this?" I'm really sorry. I had to go out for something important." "Well, the password changed at midnight, so you just have to sleep in the corridor, won't you?" "You're joking," said Harry. "Why did it have to change at midnight?" "That's the way it is," said the fat lady. "If you're angry, go and take it up with the headmaster. He's the one who tightens security." "Fantastic," said Harry bitterly, looking around for the hard floor. "Really brilliant. Yeah, I would go take it up with Dumbledore if he was here. But he's the one who wanted me to—" "He is here," said a voice behind Harry. Professor Dumbledore returned to the school an hour ago." Nearly headless Nick was gliding towards Harry. His head wobbled, as usual, on his ruff. "I had it from the bloody Baron, who saw him arrive," said Nick. "He appeared, according to the Baron, to be in good spirits, although a little tired, of course." "Where is he?" said Harry, his heart leaping. "Oh, groaning and clanking up in the astronomy tower, his favourite pastime. Not the bloody Baron, Dumbledore." "Oh, in his office," said Nick. "I believe, from what the Baron said, that he had business to attend to before turning in." "Yeah, he has," said Harry, excitement blazing in his chest at the prospect of telling Dumbledore he had secured the memory. He wheeled about and sprinted off, ignoring the fat lady who was calling after him. "Come back, I lied. I was annoyed you woke me up. The password's still tapeworm." But Harry was already hurtling back along the corridor, and within minutes he was saying "Toffee eclairs" to Dumbledore's gargoyle, which leapt aside, permitting Harry entrance onto the spiral staircase. "Enter," said Dumbledore when Harry knocked. He sounded exhausted. Harry pushed the door open, and there was Dumbledore's office, looking the same as ever, but with black, star-strewn skies beyond the window. "Good gracious, Harry," said Dumbledore in surprise. "To what do I owe this very late pleasure?" "Sir, I've got it. I've got the memory from Slughorn." Harry pulled out the tiny glass bottle and showed it to Dumbledore. For a moment or two the headmaster looked stunned, then his face split in a wide smile. "Harry, this is spectacular news. Very well done indeed. I knew you could do it." All thought of the lateness of the hour apparently forgotten, he hurried towards his desk and took a bottle of Slughorn's memory in his uninjured hand, and strode over to the cabinet where he kept the pensive. "And now," said Dumbledore, placing the stone basin upon his desk, and emptying the contents into the bottle into it. "Now at last we shall see. Harry, quickly." Harry bowed obediently over the pensive, and felt his feet leave the floor. Once again he fell through the darkness, and landed in Horace Slughorn's office many years before. There was a much younger Horace Slughorn, with his thick, shiny, straw-coloured hair, and his gingery blonde moustache, sitting in the comfortable winged armchair in his office, his feet resting upon a velvet booth, a small glass of wine in one hand, and the other rummaging in a box of crystallized pineapple. And there were half a dozen teenage boys sitting around Slughorn, with Tom Riddle in the midst of them. Marvellow's gold and black ring gleamed on his finger. Dumbledore landed beside Harry just as Riddle asked, "Sir, is it true that Professor Merrythought is retiring?" Tom, even if I knew, I couldn't tell you," said Slughorn, waving his finger reprovingly at Riddle, although winking at the same time. "I must say, I'd like to know where you get your information, boy. More knowledgeable than half the staff you are." Riddle smiled. The other boys laughed and cast him admiring looks. "What with your uncanny ability to know things you shouldn't, and your careful flattery of people who matter. Thank you for the pineapple, by the way. You're quite right, it is my favourite." Several of the boys tittered again. "I confidently expect you to rise to Minister for Magic within 20 years, 15 if you kept sending me pineapple. I've excellent contacts in the ministry." Tom Riddle merely smiled, and the others laughed again. Harry noticed that he was by no means the eldest of the group of boys, but he seemed to look to him as their leader. "I don't know what politics would suit me, sir," when the laughter had died away. "I don't have the right kind of background, for one thing." A couple of the boys around him smirked at each other. Harry was sure they were enjoying a private joke, undoubtedly about what they knew or suspected regarding their gang leader's famous ancestor. "Nonsense," said Slughorn briskly. "It couldn't be plainer that you come from decent wizarding stock. Abilities like yours. You'll go far, Tom. I've never been wrong about a student yet." I briefly glanced up at Nimbus and have lost my place. Sorry. Good gracious, is it that time already? You'd better get going, boys, or else we'll all be in trouble. Lestrange, I want your essay tomorrow or it's detention. Same goes for you, Avery. One by one, the boys filed out of the room. Slughorn heaved himself out of his armchair and carried his empty glass over to his desk. A movement behind him made him look around. Riddle was still there. "Look sharp, Tom. You don't want to be caught out of bed, out of hours. And you're a prefect." "Sir, I wanted to ask you something." "Ask away then, my boy, ask away." "Sir, I wondered what you know about Horcruxes." Slughorn stared at him, his thick fingers absent-mindedly caressing the stem of his wine-glass. "Project for defence against the dark arts, is it?" But Harry could tell that Slughorn knew perfectly well that it was not schoolwork. "No, not exactly, sir," said Riddle. "I came across the term while reading, and didn't fully understand it." "No, well, you'd be hard pushed to find a book at Hogwarts that'd give you details of Horcruxes, Tom." "That's very dark stuff indeed," said Slughorn. "But you obviously know all about them, sir. I mean, a wizard like you. Sorry, I mean, if you can't tell me, obviously. I just knew that if someone could tell me, you could. I just thought I'd ask." It was very well done, thought Harry. The hesitancy, the casual tone, the careful flattery, none of it overdone. He, Harry, had had too much experience trying to wheedle information out of reluctant people not to recognize a master at work. He could tell that Riddle wanted information very, very much. Perhaps he'd been working towards this moment for weeks. "Well," said Slughorn, not looking at Riddle, but fiddling with the ribbon on top of the box of crystallized pineapple. "Well, it can't hurt to give you an overview, of course, just so that you understand the term. A Horcrux is a word used for an object in which a person has concealed part of their soul." "I don't quite understand how that works, though, sir," said Riddle. His voice was carefully controlled, but Harry could sense his excitement. "Well, you split your soul, you see," said Slughorn, "and hide part of it in an object outside your body. Then, even if one's body is attacked and destroyed, one cannot die, for part of the soul remains earthbound and undamaged. But, of course, existence in such a form—" Slughorn's face crumpled, and Harry found himself remembering the words he had heard nearly 2 years before. I was ripped from my body. I was less than a spirit, less than the meanest ghost, but still, I was alive. Few would want it, Tom, very few. Death would be preferable. But Riddle's hunger was now apparent. His expression was greedy. He could no longer hide his longing. How do you split your soul? Well, said Slughorn uncomfortably, you must understand that a soul is supposed to remain intact and whole. Splitting it is an act of violation. It's against nature. But how do you do it? By an act of evil, the supreme act of evil, by committing murder. Killing rips the soul apart. The wizard intent upon creating a Horcrux must use the damage to his advantage. He would encase the torn portion. Encase? But how? There is a spell. Do not ask me, I do not know, said Slughorn, shaking his head like an old elephant bothered by mosquitoes. Do I look as though I've tried it? Do I look like a killer? No, sir, of course not, said Riddle quickly. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend. No, not at all, not at all, not offended, said Slughorn gruffly. It's natural to feel curiosity about these things. Wizards have a certain caliber, or of a certain caliber, have always been drawn to that aspect of magic. Yes, sir, said Riddle. What I don't understand, though, just out of curiosity, I mean, would one Horcrux be of much use? Can you only split your soul once? Wouldn't it be better if... hold on, I turned too many pages. I have. Would it be better, make you stronger, to have your soul in more pieces? I mean, for instance, isn't 7 the most powerfully magical number? Wouldn't 7... Merlin's beard, Tom, yelled Slughorn. 7? Isn't it bad enough killing one person? And in any case, bad enough to divide the soul, but to rip it into 7 pieces? Slughorn looked deeply troubled now. He was gazing at Riddle as though he had never seen him plainly before, and Harry could tell he was regretting entering into the conversation at all. Of course, he muttered, it's all hypothetical. What we're discussing, isn't it? All academic. Yes, sir, of course, said Riddle quickly. But all the same, Tom, keep it quiet, what I've told. That's to say, what we've discussed. People wouldn't like to think that we've been chatting about Horcruxes. It's a banned subject at Hogwarts, you know. Dumbledore is particularly fierce about it. I won't say another word, sir, said Riddle, and he left, but not before Harry had glimpsed his face, which was full of that same wild happiness that he'd worn when he first found out he was a wizard. The sort of happiness that did not enhance his handsome features, but made them somehow less human. Thank you, Harry, said Dumbledore quietly. Let us go. When Harry landed back in the office floor, Dumbledore was already sitting down behind his desk. Harry, too, sat too, and waited for Dumbledore to speak. I have been hoping for this piece of evidence for a very long time, said Dumbledore at last. It confirms the theory on which I have been working. It tells me I am right, and also how far there is still to go. Harry suddenly noticed that every single one of the old headmasters and headmistresses in the portraits around the walls was awake and listening in on their conversation. A corpulent, red-nosed wizard had actually taken out an ear trumpet. Well, Harry, said Dumbledore, I'm sure you understood the significance of what we just heard. At the same age as you are now, give or take a few months, Tom Riddle was doing all he could to find out how to make himself immortal. Do you think he succeeded then, sir? Harry asked. He made a Horcrux, and that's why he won't die when he's attacked. He had a Horcrux hidden somewhere, a bit of his soul that was safe. A bit, or more, said Dumbledore. You heard Voldemort. What he particularly wanted from Horace was an opinion on what would happen to a wizard who created more than one Horcrux. What would happen to a wizard so determined to evade death that he would be prepared to murder many times, rip his soul repeatedly, so as to store it in many separately concealed Horcruxes. No book would have given him that information, as far as I know. As far, I am sure, as Voldemort knew, no wizard had ever done more than tear his soul in two. Dumbledore paused for a moment, marshalling his thoughts, and then said, 4 years ago, I received what I considered certain proof that Voldemort had split his soul. Where? Asked Harry. How? You handed it to me, Harry, said Dumbledore. The diary. Riddle's diary. The one giving instructions on how to reopen the Chamber of Secrets. I don't understand, sir, said Harry. Well, I thought, although I didn't see Riddle who came out of the diary, what you described to me was a phenomenon I had never witnessed. A mere memory starting to act and think for itself. A mere memory sapping the life out of a girl into the hands who it had fallen. No, something much more sinister had lived inside that book. A fragment of soul. I was almost sure of it. The diary had been a Horcrux. But this raised many questions, and they needed answered. What intrigued and alarmed me was that the diary that had been intended as a weapon as much as a safeguard. I don't understand, said Harry. Well, it worked as a Horcrux, as it is supposed to work. In other words, a fragment of soul concealed inside that was kept safe, and had, undoubtedly, played its part in preventing the death of its owner. But there could be no doubt that Riddle really wanted that diary read. He wanted the piece of his soul to inhabit or to possess someone else, so that Slytherin's monster would be unleashed again. Well, he didn't want his hard work to be wasted, said Harry. He wanted people to know that he was Slytherin's heir, because he couldn't take credit for it at the time. Quite correct, said Dumbledore, nodding. But don't you see, Harry, that if he intended the diary to be passed to, or planted on, some future Hogwarts student, he was being remarkably blasé about that precious fragment of his soul concealed within it. The point of a Horcrux is, as Professor Slughorn explained, to keep part of the self hidden and safe, not to fling it into somebody else's path and run the risk that they might destroy it, as indeed happened. That particular fragment of soul is no more. You just saw to that. The careless way in which Voldemort regarded this Horcrux seemed most ominous to me. It suggested that he had made more, or had been planning to make more Horcruxes, so the loss of his first would not be so detrimental. I did not wish to believe it, but something else seemed to make sense. Or rather, nothing else seemed to make sense. Then you told me 2 years later, on that night that Voldemort returned to his body, he made a most illuminating and alarming statement to his Death Eaters. I, who have gone further than anybody along the path that leads to immortality. That's what you told me, he said. Further than anybody. And I thought I knew what that meant, although the Death Eaters did not. He was referring to Horcruxes. Horcruxes in the plural, Harry, which I do not believe any other wizard has ever had. Yet it fitted. Lord Voldemort seemed to grow less human with the passing years, and the transformation he has undergone seemed to me to be the explainable, only explainable if his soul was mutilated beyond the realms of what we might call usual evil. So he's made himself impossible to kill by murdering other people, said Harry. Why couldn't he just make a philosopher's stone or steal one, if he was so interested in immortality? Well, we know that he tried to steal, or he tried to do just that 5 years ago, said Dumbledore. But there are several reasons why I think a philosopher's stone would appeal less than Horcruxes to Lord Voldemort. While the elixir of life does indeed extend life, it must be drunk regularly for all eternity if the drinker is to maintain his immortality. Therefore, Voldemort would be entirely dependent on the elixir, and if it ran out, or was contaminated, or the stone was stolen, he would die just like any other man. Voldemort likes to operate alone, remember. I believe that he would have found the thought of being dependent on the elixir intolerable. Of course, he was prepared to drink it, if it would take him out of that horrible part life to which he was condemned after attacking you, but only to regain a body. Thereafter, I'm convinced he intended to continue to rely on his Horcruxes. He would need nothing more, if only he could regain a human form. He was already immortal, you see, or as close to immortal as any man can be. But now, Harry, armed with this information, the crucial memory that you have succeeded in procuring for us, we are closer to the secret of finishing Lord Voldemort than anyone has ever been before. You heard him, Harry. Would it be better, make you stronger to have your soul in more pieces? Isn't seven the most powerfully magical number? Isn't seven the most powerfully magical number? Yes, I think the idea of a seven-part soul would greatly appeal to Lord Voldemort. He made 7 Horcruxes, said Harry, horror-struck, while several of the portraits on the walls made similar noises of shock and outrage. But they could be anywhere in the world, hidden, buried, or invisible. I'm glad you appreciate the magnitude of the problem, said Dumbledore calmly. But firstly, no, Harry, not 7, 6. The seventh part of his soul, however maimed, resides inside his regenerated body. That was the part of him that lived in the spectral essence for so many years during his exile. Without that, he has no self at all. That seventh piece of soul will be the last anyone wishing to kill Voldemort must attack, the piece that lives in his body. But the 6 Horcruxes, then, said Harry a little desperately. How do we find them? You are forgetting. You have already destroyed one of them, and I have destroyed another. You have? Said Harry eagerly. Yes, indeed, said Dumbledore. He raised his blackened, burned-looking hand. The ring, Harry. Marvellow's ring. And a terrible curse there was upon it, too. Had it not been, forgive me for my seemingly lack of modesty, for my own prodigious skill, and for Professor Snape's timely action when I returned to Hogwarts, desperately injured, I might not have lived to tell the tale. However, a withered hand does not seem an unreasonable exchange for the seventh of Voldemort's soul. The ring is no longer a Horcrux. But how did you find it? Well, as you now know, I have made it my business for many years to discover as much as I can about Voldemort's past life. I've travelled widely, visiting those places he once knew. I stumbled across the ring hidden in the ruin of Gaunt's house. It seems that once Voldemort had succeeded in sealing a piece of his soul inside it, he did not want to wear it anymore. He hid it, protected by powerful enchantments, in the shack where his ancestors had once lived. Morphin having been carted off to Azkaban, of course, never guessing that I might, one day, take the trouble to visit the ruin, or that I might be keeping an eye open for traces of magical concealment. However, we should not congratulate ourselves too heartily. You destroyed the diary, I the ring, but if we are right, and our theory of the seven-part soul, 4 Horcruxes remain. And they could be anything, said Harry. They could be old tin cans or, I don't know, empty potion bottles. You're thinking about portkeys, Harry, which must be ordinary objects, easy to overlook. But Lord Voldemort, using tin cans or old potion bottles to guard his own precious soul? You're forgetting what I've shown you. Lord Voldemort liked to collect trophies, and he preferred objects with powerful magical history. His pride, his beliefs in his own superiority, his determination to carve himself a, a startling place in magical history. These things suggest to me that Voldemort would have chosen his Horcruxes with some care, favouring objects worthy of the honour. The diary wasn't that special. The diary, as you have said yourself, was proof that he was the heir of Slytherin. I am sure that Voldemort considered it of stupendous importance. So the other Horcruxes, said Harry. Do you think you know where those are, sir? I can only guess, said Voldemort. For reasons I have already given, I believe that Lord Voldemort would prefer objects that, in themselves, have a certain grandeur. I have therefore trawled back through Voldemort's past to see if I can find evidence of such artifacts that have disappeared around him. The locket, Harry said loudly. Hufflepuff's cup. Yes, said Dumbledore, smiling. I would be prepared to bet, maybe not my other hand, but a couple of fingers, that they became Horcruxes 3 and 4. The remaining two, assuming again that he created a total of six, are more of a problem. I would hazard a guess that, having secured objects from Hufflepuff and Slytherin, he set out to track down objects owned by Gryffindor or Ravenclaw. Four objects from the four founders would, I am sure, have exerted a powerful pull on Voldemort's imagination. I cannot answer for whether he managed to find anything of Ravenclaw's, and I am confident, however, that the only known relic of Gryffindor remains safe. Dumbledore pointed his blackened fingers to the wall behind him, where a ruby-encrusted sword reposed within the glass case. "Do you think that's why he really wanted to come back to Hogwarts, sir?" said Harry. "To try to find something from one of the other founders?" "My thoughts precisely," said Dumbledore, "but unfortunately that does not advance us much further, for he was turned away, or so I believe, without a chance to search the school. I'm forced to conclude that he never fulfilled his ambition of collecting the four founders' objects. He definitely had two. He may have found three, but that's the best we can do for now. Even if we got something of Ravenclaw's or of Gryffindor's, that leaves the sixth Horcrux," said Harry, counting on his fingers, "unless he got both." "I don't think so," said Dumbledore. "I think I know what the sixth Horcrux is, and I wonder what you will say when I confess that I've been curious for a while about the behaviour of the snake, Nagini." "The snake?" said Harry, startled. "You can use animals as Horcruxes?" "Well, it is inadvisable to do so," said Dumbledore, "because to confide part of your soul to something that can think and move for itself is obviously a very risky business. However, if my calculations are correct, Voldemort was still at least one Horcrux short of his goal of six when he entered your parents' house with the intention of killing you. He seems to have reserved the process of making Horcruxes for particularly significant deaths. You would certainly have been that. He believed that in killing you, he was destroying the danger the prophecy had outlined. He believed he was making himself invincible, and I'm sure he intended to make his final Horcrux with your death. As we know, he failed. After an interval of some years, however, he used Nagini to kill an old Muggle man, and that might have occurred to him to turn her into the last Horcrux. She underlies the Slytherin connection, which enhances Lord Voldemort's mystique. I think he is, perhaps, fond of her as he can be of anything. He certainly likes to keep her close, and he seems to have an unusual amount of control over her, even for a Parselmouth. "So," said Harry, "the diary's gone, the ring's gone, the cup and the locket and the snake are still intact. Do you think there might be a Horcrux somewhere that was once Ravenclaw's or Gryffindor's?" "An admirably succinct and accurate summary, yes," said Dumbledore, bowing his head. "So, are you still looking for them, sir? Is that where you're going, when you've been leaving the school?" "Correct," said Dumbledore. "I've been looking for a very long time. I think, perhaps, I might be close to finding another one. There are hopeful signs." "And if you do," said Harry quickly, "can I come with you to help you get rid of it?" Dumbledore looked at Harry very intently for a moment before saying, "Yes, I think so." "I can?" said Harry, thoroughly taken aback. "Oh, yes," said Dumbledore, smiling slightly. "I think you have earned that right." Harry felt his heart lift. It was very good not to hear the words of caution or protection for once. The headmasters and headmistresses around the walls seemed less impressed by Dumbledore's decision. Harry saw a few of them shaking their heads, and Phineas Nigellus actually snorted. "Does Voldemort know when a Horcrux is destroyed, sir? Can he feel it?" Harry asked, ignoring the portraits. "A very interesting question, Harry. I believe not. I believe that Voldemort is so immersed in evil that these crucial parts of him have been detached for so long, he does not feel as we do. Perhaps at the point of death he might be aware of the loss, but he was not aware, for instance, that the diary had been destroyed until he forced the truth out of his Lucius Malfoy. When Voldemort discovered that the diary had been mutilated and robbed of all its powers, I am told that his anger was terrible to behold, but I thought he meant Lucius Malfoy to smuggle it into Hogwarts. He did, years ago, when he was sure he would be able to create more Horcruxes, but still Lucius was supposed to wait for Voldemort to say so, and he never received it, for Voldemort vanished shortly after giving him the diary. No doubt he thought that Lucius would not dare do anything with a Horcrux other than guard it carefully, but he was counting too much upon Lucius's fear of a master who had been gone for years and whom Lucius believed dead. Of course, Lucius did not know what the diary really was. I understand that Voldemort had told him the diary would cause the Chamber of Secrets to reopen because it was cleverly enchanted. Had Lucius known that it held a portion of his master's soul in his hands, he would undoubtedly have treated it with more reverence. But instead, he went ahead and carried out the old plan for his own ends by planting the diary on Arthur Weasley's daughter. He hoped to discredit Arthur, have me thrown out of Hogwarts, and get rid of a highly incriminating object in one stroke. Ah, poor Lucius. What with Voldemort's fury about the fact he threw away the Horcrux for his own gain, and the fiasco at the Ministry last year, I would not be surprised if he is secretly glad to be safe in Azkaban for the moment. Harry sat in thought for a moment and said, "So, if all his Horcruxes are destroyed, Voldemort could be killed." "Yes, I think so," said Dumbledore. "Without his Horcruxes, Voldemort will be a mortal man with a maimed and diminished soul. Never forget, though, that while his soul may be damaged beyond repair, his brain and his magical power remain intact. It will take uncommon skill and the power to kill a wizard like Voldemort, even without his Horcruxes." "But I haven't got uncommon skill and power," said Harry, before he could stop himself. "Yes, you have," said Dumbledore firmly. "You've a power that Voldemort has never had. You can—" "I know," said Harry impatiently. "I can love." It was only with difficulty that he stopped himself from adding, "Big deal." "Yes, Harry," said Dumbledore firmly. "Uh, you can love," said Dumbledore, who looked as though he knew perfectly well what Harry had just refrained from saying, which, given everything that has happened to you, is a remarkable thing. You are still too young to understand how unusual you are, Harry. "So when the prophecy says I'll have the power the Dark Lord knows not, he just means love?" asked Harry, feeling a little let down. "Yes, just love," said Dumbledore. "But Harry, never forget what the prophecy says is only significant because Voldemort made it so. I told you this at the end of last year. Voldemort singled you out as the person who would be most dangerous to him. In doing so, he made you the person who would be the most dangerous to him." "But it comes to the same—" "No, it doesn't," said Dumbledore, sounding impatient now, pointing at Harry with a black withered hand. He said, "You're setting too much store by prophecy." "But," spluttered Harry, "but you said the prophecy means—" "If Voldemort had heard the prophecy, would it have been fulfilled? Would it have meant anything? Of course not. Do you think every prophecy in the Hall of Prophecies has been fulfilled?" "But," said Harry, bewildered, "last year you said one of us would have to kill the other." "Harry, only because Voldemort made a very grave error and acted on Professor Trelawney's words. If Voldemort had never murdered your father, would he not? He would not have imparted you with a furious desire for revenge? Of course not. If he had not forced your mother to die for you, would he have not given you magical protection he could not penetrate? Of course not. Do you see? Voldemort himself creates his own worst enemies, just as tyrants everywhere do. If you have any idea how much tyrants fear the people that they oppress, all of them realize that one day, amongst their many victims, there is sure to be one who rises against them and strikes back. Voldemort is no different. Always he has been on the lookout for one who would challenge him. He heard of the prophecy and he leapt into action, with the result that he has not only handpicked the man who's likely to finish him. He handed him uniquely deadly weapons. But it is essential you understand this, said Dumbledore, standing up and striding across the room, his glittering robe swooshing in his wake. Harry had never seen him so agitated. By attempting to kill you... Oh, my camera's down. We'll finish the chapter. I'll see if I can fix it. Where were we? By attempting to kill you, Voldemort himself singled you out uh, as the remarkable person who sits there in front of me, and gave him the tools for the job. It is Voldemort's fault that you were able to see into his thoughts, his ambitions, that you even understand the snake-like language in which he gives orders. And yet, Harry, despite your privileged insight into Voldemort's world, which incidentally is a gift that any Death Eater would like to have, you have never been seduced by the dark arts, never for a second, or shown the slightest desire to become one of Voldemort's followers. Of course I haven't, said Harry indignantly. He killed my mum and dad. You are protected, in short, by your ability to love, said Dumbledore loudly. The only protection that can possibly work against the lure of a power like Voldemort's. In spite of all temptation you have endured, all the suffering, you remain pure of heart. Just as pure as you are. They're very long sentences, right? In spite of all the temptation you have endured, all the suffering, you remain pure of heart. Just as pure as you were at the age of 11, when you stared into a mirror and reflected your heart's desire, and it showed you the only way to thwart Lord Voldemort, and not immortality or riches. Harry, have you any idea how few wizards could have seen what you saw in the mirror? Voldemort could not have known then what he was dealing with. But he did not. He knows it now. You have flitted into Lord Voldemort's mind without damage to yourself, but he cannot possess you without enduring mortal agony, as he discovered with the Ministry. I do not think he understands why, Harry, but he was in such a hurry to mutilate his own soul. He never paused to understand the incomparable power of a soul that is untarnished and whole. But, sir, said Harry, making valiant efforts not to sound argumentative, it all comes down to the same thing, doesn't it? I've got to try and kill him, or... Got to? Said Voldemort. Of course you've got to, but not because of the prophecy. Because you yourself will never rest until you've tried. We both know it. Imagine, please, just for a moment, that you'd never heard that prophecy. How would you feel about Voldemort now? Think. Harry watched Dumbledore striding up and down the front of him and thought. He thought of his own mother and father and Sirius. He thought of Cedric Diggory. He thought of all the terrible deeds he knew Voldemort had done. A flame seemed to leap inside his chest, searing his throat. I want him finished, said Harry quietly, and I want to do it. Of course you would, cried Dumbledore. You see, the prophecy does not mean you have to do anything, but the prophecy caused Lord Voldemort to mark you as his equal. In other words, you're free to choose your way, quite free to turn back on the prophecy. Turn your back on the prophecy. But Voldemort continues to set store by the prophecy. He will continue to hunt you, which makes it certain, really, that one of us is going to end up killing the other, said Harry. Yes. But he understood at last what Voldemort had been trying, or what Dumbledore had been trying to tell him. It was, he thought, the difference between being dragged into the arena to face a battle to the death and someone walking into the arena with your head held high. Some people, perhaps, would say that there is little to choose between the two ways, but Dumbledore knew, and so do I, thought Harry, with a rush of fierce pride, and so did my parents, that there is all the difference in the world. End of chapter 23. Gonna take a short break. I see the camera's back on, but Nimbus has disappeared. Wonder where he is. He's maybe down getting some hay. I'm sure he'll be back up in a wee minute. And yes, be back in a minute.